Good morning and welcome to the It's All Greek to Me blog tour. This is blog number 19 and I'm Dr. Paul Kiritsis. Today we're going to be continuing with the discussion relating to the birth of the Minoan Empire and its matrilocal religion. Nowadays, we like to commend ourselves for the technological and scientific ambience of the 21st century. The evolution of interactive applications such as iPhones, iPads, HTC Androids and social networking systems such as Facebook, Twitter and MySpace have shortened distances and shrunk our world considerably. They've also contributed to some less favourable consequences, namely the turning inward of attention, which has stunted social interaction, and to a greater extent disconnection from the natural cycles of the planet and the larger cosmos. The aforementioned feats, if you wish to call them that, have been made possible through the fiercely resistant patriarchal mentality of the Iron Age, the greater will to achieve transcendence through the subjugation of nature, irrespective of whether or not the enterprise draws to itself the loss of life. Foremost of this movement were the Mycenaean Greeks, whose endless pursuit of power were epitomized in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, and continued by Virgil in the Aeneid. This masculine aesthetic domination of nature, deemed noble, heroic, and glorious, garnered expression in the formation of communities that were underpinned by compartmentalization, by the induction of hierarchy and conventional marriage. Given that the masculine or yang consciousness has always been connected with territoriality and activity and hence with the fiery energy of the sun, it makes sense that the early patriarchal cultures would have adapted a calendrical system with the solar satellite as prevailing mediator. The fundamental aim of this civil calendar was to order the government administration according to the diurnal or daytime hours of the 24-hour cycle. Its induction was something of a retrograde step in all respects, for it jettisoned the lunar and stellar cycles which had mediated the religious and spiritual affairs of our ancient ancestors, and consequently disconnected us from the celestial movements and events which stood as great markers on a wheel of time that was both measurable and eternal. When the all-powerful priests of Heliopolis introduced the solar-based civil calendar into Upper Egypt during the first quarter of the 3rd millennium BC, the lunar chronometer was retained as the mediator of religious and spiritual events. The Greeks, whom frequented Egyptian shores, followed in their stead and devised the administration of their own city-states with a similar calendar, but it was merely a case of prolonging an indelible and inevitable death, for when the Romans supplanted the old calendrical systems with the Julian one in 45 BCE, the likes of the tropical or solar year was given comprehensive precedence. Hence the moon and stars, demoted by the Heliopolitan priests as secondary regulators of the wheel of time, soon found themselves at the very bottom of the cosmic totem pole, imprisoned with the dithering shades, within the dithering shades of human memory. Foremost of these memories was lunar nutation, a vacillating motion in the moon's axial rotation that causes a continual shift in the position of ascension along the horizon and culminates with a return to its point of origin every 18.6 years. An even more significant and dramatic astronomical phenomenon that was temporarily lost recurs every 19 years and involves the harmonious alignment of the sun and moon. Known as the Metonic cycle, the 19 tropical solar years or 235 synodic lunar months it takes for the lunar phases to begin to unravel on the same days of the same months of each year, again, would no doubt have impressed the Minoan astronomer priestesses and priests. This ever-present and eternal cycle, which repeated at 38, 57, 76 years, and so forth, would have been perceived as a sacred marriage, in Greek we call this an ieros gamos, between the lunar and solar energies, and consequently a renewal of truth and order in what at times would have probably appeared to be a chaotic and nonsensical universe. I suppose the contemporary ability to track the habitual motions of the celestial spheres through computerized telescopes has drastically simplified what would have otherwise been an overtly intricate and painstaking task. Impressive as they are, these sophisticated technologies have appeared quite late in our evolutionary history, and so we would probably come up short should we dare to weigh ourselves up against the astronomical acuteness of any primitive matriarchy. In no way can the magnanimity of their achievement be diminished, especially when their observations would have been precariously hinged and entirely dependent upon the accuracy of the naked eye, painstaking repetition of the latter, and the convenience of some very simple writing and recording implements. In fact, the scope and depth of their visual acuity, perceptions and conscious aspiration was such that it allowed them to descry a cosmic phenomenon known as axial precession or precession of the equinoxes. The sweeping, numinous and all-encompassing cosmic cycle is caused by a single wobble, or a slight wobble, in the Earth's axial rotation, causing the terrestrial pole to trace out a cyclical path around the ecliptic. Changes in the Earth's orbital parameters gradually shift the vernal point, which happens to occur between the 21st and 22nd of March, in the reverse direction of the Sun's annual pilgrimage through each of the 12 zodiacal signs, giving an illusion that the belt of the ecliptic is slowly being torqued in a clockwise direction. The vernal point moves about 1 degree every 72 years, and it takes about 26,000 years for it to traverse the full 360-degree revolution mapped out by the 12 zodiacal constellations. Hence, each constellation occupies the vernal point for a period of about 2,160 years before forfeiting its position to the next. We are currently in the Piscean Age, a period marked and coloured by the sacrificial consciousness of Jesus Christ. This particular age began around 60 BCE, a time when pharaonic Egypt and classical Greece were nearing the end of their tether, and imperial Rome was on the ascendancy. It appears that the proactive, fiery, and restless yang energy, which defined masculine aesthetic consciousness, found full expression in the Aryan Age, about 2220 BCE to 60 BCE. Save for being an extremely productive time in the cultivation of the arts and sciences, it was this age that saw the ram-headed gods of the patriarchal solar cults rise to prominence and incarnate through the Amenhoteps and Ramesses, Thutmosis III, Alexander the Great, and of course Julius Caesar. If we were to push further back into the dark and misty recesses of history, we would run into the Taurian Age, 4380 BCE to 2220 BCE. Had the astronomer priestesses of Knossos looked towards the pre-dawn skies of the winter solstice at the inception of this age, they would have noted that the stream of celestial waters above them resembled an outstretched female figure with the tips of her extremities touching the east and west horizons. In time, they would have observed that the solar orb emerged from the area around her pudendum in the manner of a child being born from its mother, only to sink back into the oblivion of darkness at the end of its diurnal journey through the area around the mouth. Curiously, the woman's pudendum would have also marked the bucranium of Taurus, with its horns extended westward towards Aries. Seeing that the sun rose continuously in that constellation, the priestesses would have probably attributed an entirely bovine nature to the male consort of the goddess. Alternatively, the shape of the woman's mouth would have imitated the double blades of an axe, giving the illusion that the solar bull god was being hacked to death at dusk. So it probably would have looked a bit like this, if you're looking at it from below. An observer, or any observer in fact, standing beneath the cupola of the pre-dawn skies around 4330 BC in Knossos would have witnessed the great mother goddess and the sacrificial state of her son-lover, the youthful bull god, reflected in the pattern of the stars above, a wholly celestial representation of emotionally coloured archetypal symbols deemed sacrosanct to Minoan cosmology. The wider point being made here is that the stars give voice to the inner archetype at work as it draws its psychic contents onto the sky like a connect-the-dot puzzle, while simultaneously giving a rough estimate of when it may have entered the sphere of history. And in speaking through the sound language of mathematics, the stars openly defy the archaeological establishment by estimating a time much older than the accepted convention. According to the eternal ones, the stars, the foundation of the Minoan Empire and the inauguration of the cult of the Mother Goddess and her bull god's consort occurred in 4380 BCE, roughly 7 or 8 centuries before the foundation date proposed by Sir Arthur Evans, which of course he called the pre-palatial period. Now, a great many historians and scientists who adhere to the conventional chronology, which has defined all perception over the last few centuries, would scoff at such an inference. They would allude to the fact that knowledge of axial precession, or precession of the equinoxes, didn't enter our collective consciousness until Hipparchus of Rhodes, who lived between about 190 and 120 BCE, until he juxtaposed the sidereal and tropical years in the 2nd century BCE. But for anyone able to think outside of the square, It makes no sense at all that the ancient stargazers would have been ignorant of this great cosmic cycle, seeing that they had been making millennia-long use of the stars to orientate themselves and navigate the far-ranging seas of the planet. While practicable devices to measure cycles of precession were constructed, they were extremely scarce because the level of skill needed to realize such elaborate craftsmanship was possessed only by a select few. Most of these gadgets would have been pioneered during the Iron Age, a time when the creative impetus of the human mind was working miracles in cities like Athens and Alexandria and adding tiers of meaning to our communal existence. The more significant examples that have since come to light definitely date to this period. They include the Antikythera mechanism, the Gaulish Caligny calendar, and the circular zodiac on the ceiling of the Osirian chapel at the Dendera Hatha temple in Egypt, all of which demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of lunar solar cycles and axial precession. The last of these, the Dendera zodiac, is especially important to our study. In this ancient planisphere, the precessional cycle, the 36 10-day periods of the year, known as decans, the signs of the zodiac, and the constellations depicted in the sculpture all unite under the aegis of old and more contemporary Egyptian, Babylonian, and Hellenistic mythological and religious imagery. The result is to proclaim a philosophical understanding of the ancient past as implicitly otherworldly, metaphysical and celestial, not earthly and historical as the Jewish and Christian monotheistic traditions later assumed. One of the very first advocates of the former, one of the first to vouch for a history measured by the fixed zodiacal ages that characterized axial precession, was René Adolphe Schwaller de Lubitsch, who lived between 1887 and 1961. After examining the relic, Lubitsch concluded that a primary intent of the Dendera priests of late antiquity was to mark up three important dates, the first being the inception of the age of Taurus in 4380 BCE. 6.5 millennia ago, the heliacal rising of Sirius, or her fleeting appearance in the pre-dawn skies after a 70-day absence, would have coincided with summer solstice in Crete and Egypt, as well as with the Nile inundation in the latter. It was a time when the sun's rays became scorchingly hot, tributaries became torrents, and Mother Nature was at the height of her generative powers. Sirius's inexplicable connection to and regulation of the agricultural cycle was deemed so important that the Minoan astronomer priestesses inaugurated her into their first calendrical system to mark the inception of the Cretan New Year on about the 6th of July. Then it would have occurred on the 6th of July. Given that Sirius was given prominence in the heavenly order, it's no surprise that the earliest temple palaces in Knossos, Festos, and other Minoan settlements were orientated towards this star, allowing its supernal light to illuminate their inner chambers on a date which marked the renewal of the annual solar circuit. In 4380 BCE, Sirius would have risen in conjunction with the Sun beneath Cancer's stead, which is why it appears aligned to Cancer on the north-south axis of the Dendera zodiac. As Sirius was inexplicably associated with the regenerative powers of the mother goddess, the Dendera chronometer serves as a potent reminder of the birth of the Minoan Empire under her all-omniscient eye and the subordination of its people to her divine will. And on that note, we will conclude, and we will continue with a very interesting subject in Minoan lunar consciousness in the next blog. See you then.